missing in the woods. The cold wind rustled the treetops as the old pickup truck turned off the dirt road into the dense forest. Jack Morgan, a 30-year-old lover of abandoned places, had first decided to explore a forgotten house rumored to be in a small town in Maine. "You better not go in there," an old man at the local diner warned him. "That damned shack has taken quite a few lives already." But Jack only grinned. His blog about mystical and mysterious places was gaining popularity, and each new video brought more and more subscribers. An abandoned house in the woods seemed like the perfect subject for another installment. After a couple hours of traveling down an overgrown trail, he finally saw the house. The old, dilapidated mansion standing on a small hill looked like something out of a nightmare. The windows were broken, the roof sagged, and a wooden sign still hung on the doorstep that read, "The Harrisons, welcome." Jack turned on his flashlight and stepped inside. The inside smelled damp and rotten. There were pieces of furniture, old newspapers, and what looked like children's toys lying on the floor. The house seemed frozen in some tragic moment, as if its occupants had disappeared in a hurry. On the second floor, Jack discovered a strange room. It was almost empty, but there were some symbols painted on the walls. In the center of the room stood an old phonograph, which suddenly began to play music, though Jack had never touched it. Knocking. Somewhere behind the wall there was a knocking sound, as if someone was walking toward him. Jack froze. "Who's here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice from shaking. The answer was silence, punctuated by a terrifying female scream. Jack reflexively jumped back, aiming the flashlight at the doorway. A shadow flickered in the darkness. Someone was in there. There was no doubt about it. A moment later, however, it was as silent as if nothing had happened. The phonograph was suddenly silent, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Jack wanted to leave, but curiosity got the better of him. The camera hanging around his neck turned on with a distinctive sound. "Well, if I'm going to die, at least I'm going to die with good footage," he muttered to himself, trying to calm his nervousness. Jack left the room and walked down the hallway, lighting the way with the flashlight. Whispers, quiet, barely audible, as if several voices were conversing in the corner. "Hey, who's there?" he shouted, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder and louder, howling around him. He felt the air grow heavy, as if an invisible force was pressing down on his chest. On the first floor, Jack came across a trapdoor covered in dirt and dust. The wooden lid was nailed shut, but it looked like it had been tried often to open from the inside. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled a tire iron from his backpack. After removing the boards, Jack climbed down the rickety stairs. It was cold in here, smelling musty and metallic, like the smell of blood. In the basement, he found an old desk with yellowed papers on it. On them were blueprints of the house and strange notes. "Lock them all up. Don't let them come out. She's still watching. The curse cannot be broken." The same symbols were drawn on the floor as in the room on the second floor. Among them were deep scratches like claw marks. Suddenly there was a sound from the corner of the basement, as if something were scraping against the walls. Jack pointed his flashlight and saw. The creature looked human, but its skin was white, almost translucent. Its eyes were missing and its mouth was twisted in a horrifying grimace. It stood hunched over, head tilted to the side, as if listening. When the flashlight beam fell on it, the creature let out a shrill shriek and rushed toward Jack. "Shit!" he shouted, tearing toward the stairs. The creature moved with inhuman speed. The ladder collapsed as he managed to climb up, leaving the creature at the bottom. But its screeching echoed throughout the house. Jack found another room on the second floor. It was untouched, as if the owners had just left. On the wall were pictures of the Harrison family. A man with glasses, his wife with a cold smile, and their 2 children. He noticed a diary on the nightstand. Leafing through the pages, Jack learned that the Harrisons were a family of occultists. They performed rituals to summon spirits of the forest to protect the house. But something had gone wrong. "We should never have called her," the last entry read. "She won't leave until she's taken everyone." Jack had no sooner closed his journal than a woman's scream came from inside the saw that the door to the room had slammed shut on its own. The creature's shrieking sounded very close. Jack rushed to the window trying to open it, but the frame wouldn't move. Suddenly, a woman appeared in front of him. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, and a black liquid dripped from the corner of her mouth. She whispered, "You will be next." Jack dazedly stepped back. The woman stood motionless, as if her feet were stuck to the floor. She slowly raised her hand, pointing toward the door. At that moment, the flashlight began to flicker, and muffled footsteps sounded behind her. Without thinking, Jack rushed toward the exit, but the door was locked. He frantically yanked on the knob as a growl sounded behind him. He turned around and saw the same creature coming up the stairs, unbending its limbs like a spider. In desperation, he rushed to the window and shattered the glass with his camera. The wind whipped into the room, bringing with it the smell of rock. Without thinking, Jack jumped outside and collapsed to the ground. When he got up, he realized he'd hurt his leg, but he couldn't stop. It was as if the house had come to life. Shadows began to emerge from the broken windows, wriggling through the air. In the distance, there was laughter that turned to hysterical howls. Jack ran toward the path he'd seen earlier, but the farther he went, the thicker the forest became. Branches reached for him like hands, clinging to his clothes. "You won't get away," came a voice right in his head. He stopped, breathing heavily, and looked around. There was no forest around him. Instead, he stood in a clearing surrounded by thick fog. In the middle of the clearing, he could see a circle of stones, and in the center lay an old, moss-covered chest. The chest looked ancient, covered with rust and intricate symbols carved into the lid. Jack stepped closer, feeling a strange pull. "Don't open it," a voice sounded behind him. But when he turned around, he saw no one. Against his own will, he reached for the lock. As soon as the lid was ajar, thick darkness erupted from the chest, wrapping his arms around it. It rushed outward, filling everything around him until Jack heard a piercing scream. The woman of the house appeared before him, but now her face was contorted, as if her skin was melting. "You woke her up," she wailed, coming closer to him. The darkness continued to thicken and the screams multiplied. Jack started to back away, but something grabbed his leg. Hands covered in dirt and blood were reaching up from the ground below. He lashed out, picked up the camera, and rushed away, oblivious to the pain. In the woods, it felt like shadows were chasing him. Every time he thought he'd gotten far enough away, he saw that very house again. "You can't leave," the voices repeated. Jack realized the forest was a trap. The house, the forest, the creature, everything was part of the same living organism. In desperation, he decided to set the house on fire. Back at the mansion, Jack found a can of gasoline in the garage. Breaking down the door, he started dousing everything around him until the very same woman appeared in the air. "You think that's going to help?" she whispered, moving closer. Jack threw a match. The fire flared up quickly, engulfing the walls. The woman screamed, and with her, all the shadows that inhabited the house. He ran outside and turned around, watching the flames consume the building. Along with the fire, the voices, the screams, and the shadows disappeared. The house burned to the ground, but the forest remained just as bleak. Jack walked out to the road where the police found him, called by locals who had spotted the fire. He told his story, but no one believed him. However, there were still tapes left in his cell. The tape showed creatures, symbols, and the same woman. A few months later, Jack released a video that went viral. But despite its success, he never returned to the woods again. And somewhere deep underground among the ruins of the house, something stirred, waiting for a new guest. Several months passed. Jack tried to live a normal life, but nightmares about the house and the creatures haunted him every night. He would wake up in a cold sweat hearing the whispers and screams he heard in the woods. The video he posted on YouTube garnered millions of views. Subscribers demanded a sequel, but Jack couldn't bring himself to return to exploring the abandoned places. One day, however, he received a letter. It was handwritten with handwriting that resembled scribbles. There was only one phrase on the paper. "You left something important at the house. Come back." Jack tried to ignore the letter, but it kept showing up again and again, even if he threw it away. Every morning he found it on his desk, as if someone had brought it in during the night. Amidst the constant pressure, he realized he had no choice. He got back into his pickup truck and headed into the woods, hoping to bring closure to this nightmarish phase of his life once and for all. When he arrived, all that remained of the house were ruins covered in snow. But the forest around him seemed even more ominous. Tree branches were leaning over as if blocking the path. Jack began to look around the ruins. Under the ashes, he found a metal hoop with engraved symbols just like the ones on the walls of the house. As soon as he touched it, there was a loud crackling sound. The forest came alive. Shadows burst out of the trees, forming figures. They surrounded Jack, whispering in his ear, "You shouldn't have come back." He grabbed his camera and started filming, hoping it would help in some way. But the camera refused to work. The lights went out and he was left in total darkness. Suddenly, he heard a familiar growl. Out of the darkness, the same creature had come to him. It was even creepier now, with skin hanging off its bones and black liquid flowing from its mouth. "Give me the ring, or stay with us forever," it whispered in a squeaky voice. Jack realized that the ring was the key, but to what, and why was it so important? The journal he had taken last time had mentioned a ritual that could banish the evil that dwelled in the house and forest. The key to the ritual was the ring that now lay in his hands. Without wasting time, Jack began to carve the symbols into the ground as described in the journal. The creature, meanwhile, circled around, coming closer and closer. When the last symbol was completed, the forest was filled with a bright light. The creature squealed, dissolving into thin air. The house, the forest, and even the ruins disappeared, leaving only an empty clearing. Jack returned home. The nightmares had stopped and the voices were gone. However, he felt that something had changed. Sometimes, looking in the mirror, he noticed his reflection smiling, although he himself did not move his lips. His subscribers noticed that something was wrong with him. The videos he was now posting were strange, dark, and incomprehensible. People began to unsubscribe. A few months later, Jack went missing. His house was found empty, and in his bedroom, the very same symbols were carved on the wall. It is said that no one can find the forest anymore, as if it disappeared along with the house. But sometimes locals hear screams from far away, as if someone is still trying to escape. Where the Harrison house used to stand, there is now a gloomy tree with curved branches, and in the shadows of its crown, figures can sometimes be seen watching anyone who dares to come too close. 2 years have passed since Jack's disappearance. His channel has become a legend among Mystic fans, and his latest videos have become the object of discussion on forums. Many claimed that his latest videos showed strange figures, and the soundtrack contained encrypted messages. Meanwhile, a group of paranormal researchers from a neighboring town decided to check out the site where the Harrison home was located. Their interest was piqued by rumors of a missing blogger and anomalies associated with the place. They arrived deep in the night, armed with cameras, voice recorders, and motion detectors. But once they crossed the edge of the forest, their equipment began to malfunction. Their leader, Sarah, an experienced investigator of the paranormal, noticed that the forest seemed to come alive. The sounds of footsteps and whispers haunted them, though no one was approaching. When they reached the clearing, the same tree stood in place of the house. "I think we found what we were looking for," she said, feeling a cold sweat on her forehead. As they got closer, they saw that the bark of the tree was mottled with symbols. One of the participants, Mike, decided to touch them. As soon as his fingers touched the bark, he screamed, grabbing his head. "They're here. They're looking at us," he screamed, falling to his knees. Mike began to speak in a strange voice that didn't belong to him. It was words in a language that no one in the group could understand. Sarah and the others tried to pull Mike away, but he suddenly stood up and ran toward the tree. His eyes were blank, and his movements were as sharp as a marionette's. As he hugged the trunk of the tree, black roots began to emerge from the ground, wrapping around his body. "We have to leave," shouted another participant, Tom. But the way back was blocked. The forest had changed. The trees had melded together, forming a wall behind which figures shimmered. Sarah remembered what she had read about the Harrison house and its history. She pulled out an old map that showed a circle of symbols. If the legends were to be believed, only the reproduction of this circle could stop evil. While the others distracted the shadows, Sarah began to carve the symbols into the ground with a knife. However, the darkness grew thicker and the whispers turned to screams. Mike, whose body was now being controlled by something alien, approached Sarah. His face was contorted and the same black liquid was leaking from his mouth. "You won't stop us," he wheezed. Sarah realized that time was short. Blood was needed to complete the circle. She quickly made a cut on her hand and dripped blood into the center of the symbol. The ground shook and the tree began to burn with black flames. Mike and the other figures screamed, disappearing into thin air. When it was over, Sarah was left alone. The forest was back to normal and the tree had collapsed, leaving only ash behind. Sarah went back to town and told her story, but no one believed her. The only proof was the camera she was able to carry out of the forest. The footage captured whispers, strange sounds and moments when the trees moved on their own. However, the climax was not on the video. A few months later, Sarah disappeared. Her friends found only a map with the same symbols she had used and a note. "It's not destroyed. I have to finish what I started." The Harrison forest has disappeared from the maps again, but mystic lovers continue to search for it. Some claim to have heard of other disappearances in the area, and sometimes strange videos of a clearing covered in thick fog appear on the internet. It is said that evil is just waiting for the right moment to awaken again, and those who dare to enter this forest will never return. Chapter 26. The Curse Spreads. Years later, new posts began to appear on a popular forum dedicated to mystical phenomena. People from all over America reported strange occurrences, forests that came to life, missing tourists, and mysterious symbols found on trees and rocks. One of the active participants of the forum was a certain user under the nickname Watcher91. He claimed that he was able to find the coordinates of the place where the Harrison house stood. Watcher91 actively encouraged everyone to join the research expedition, but most of the participants took it as another prank. However, 2 subscribers, Amy and Zach, were interested in his posts. Both were experienced researchers of the paranormal. Soon they contacted Watcher91, and he invited them to a place he called a portal to another world. Amy and Zach met Watcher91 at an old gas station near the woods. He was a tall man with a tired look and a scar on his cheek. He introduced himself as Mark and showed a map that marked the path to the clearing. "I don't want to scare you, but the forest is changing. If we linger, it won't let us out," Mark warned. Amy laughed. "Come on, it's just trees. I think we can handle it." Zach was more cautious, noticing the genuine fear in Mark's voice. The path through the forest was more difficult than they expected. The trees grew so densely that light barely penetrated through their crowns. There was an oppressive silence, broken only by the crunch of twigs underfoot. The compasses and GPS devices began to malfunction as they advanced. At one point, Amy noticed that they were going in circles. The rock they'd passed an hour ago was back in their path. "Something's not right here," Zach muttered, looking around. Suddenly, a shadow flickered between the trees. Amy cried out, but Mark only shook his head. "They know we're here. The main thing is not to react." When they reached the clearing, Amy's breath caught. The spot where the Harrison house had been said to have stood was now a circle of stones covered with a strange moss. Mark pulled an old book out of his backpack, its pages speckled with writings and symbols. "This is a ritual, can close the portal forever, but it will require a sacrifice," he said, looking at them. "What sacrifice are you talking about?" Zach asked, tensing up. "Blood, just a little enough to activate the circle. But if we get it wrong..." Before Mark could finish, a thick fog enveloped the clearing. A familiar whisper sounded in the air. The fog thickened, and figures began to emerge from its depths. They were the shadows of people lost in the forest. Their faces were distorted, their eyes blank, and their movements convulsive. "Don't look into their eyes," Mark shouted, lacerating his arm with his knife and dripping blood onto the rocks. Amy and Zach began to carve symbols around the circle in a panic, just as the book had instructed. But one of the shadows crept too close and grabbed Amy's shoulder. She screamed, and her eyes became as blank as the shadows for a moment. Mark managed to knock her down before the shadow dragged her into the mist. As the last symbol was completed, the ground began to shake. A black substance erupted from beneath the circle of stones and took the form of a huge creature with long limbs and a featureless face. "It's her," Mark whispered, backing away. The creature held out its hands toward Amy and Zach, but Mark rushed forward, blocking their path. He shouted, "Finish the ritual. I'll distract her." Amy and Zach continued reading the text from the book without thinking. When the last words were spoken, the creature let out a piercing scream and disappeared with the shadows. When the fog cleared, Mark was nowhere to be found. The clearing looked deserted and the rocks were covered in ash. Amy and Zach walked out of the woods, but they felt that it wasn't over yet. They vowed not to tell anyone what had happened, but they kept the book with the ritual. Sometimes at night they hear whispers that remind them of what they saw. A few weeks later, someone posted a video on the same forum. It showed a dark forest, a familiar clearing, and a strange tree that had grown back from the ashes. The user who posted the video left the caption, "She's back, and now she doesn't need rituals." Chapter 33, Viral Nightmare. The video posted on the forum quickly spread across the internet. People began sharing their stories, claiming to hear voices, see strange dreams, and even find symbols carved into trees and walls of their homes. The phenomenon has gone global. Those who watched the videos claimed to feel an inexplicable attraction to the forests, even if they were previously afraid of the dark. Some disappeared without a trace after going in search of the cursed clearing. Amy and Zach were stunned when they saw this video. The caption read, "From Mark, we're not done. She's alive." Amy realized that the evil they were trying to destroy was just beginning to gain momentum. She contacted Zach to discuss the next step. "The book must contain answers. There has to be a way to finally destroy this," she said, leafing through the old pages. Zach nodded, but doubt was red in his eyes. "It seems the more we try to fight it, the stronger it gets. What if the ritual we did only woke something else up?" Amy fell silent. She knew he was right, but doing nothing was even scarier. The next day, they received an unexpected message from an unknown number. It contained a picture of a map with the coordinates marked with a red cross. The caption read, "If you want to finish what you started, come here. It's waiting for you." The coordinates pointed to a remote location in Maine, surrounded by dense forests. Amy and Zach knew it could be a trap, but they had no choice. The place they arrived at was even more ominous than the clearing. Here, the trees were so thick that the sky completely disappeared from view. Every tree seemed alive, and their branches moved as if trying to catch unwanted guests. Symbols carved with something sharp began to appear on the ground again. They led to an old, dilapidated church that had been wedged in the very depths of the forest. Amy stopped in front of the entrance. "This place is wrong," whispers to me. Zach, trembling, opened the door. Inside the church was an altar modeled with symbols. In the center stood a bowl filled with a thick black liquid. Amy felt the room begin to spin and the walls merge into a single movement of shadows. From the depths of the altar came the voice they had heard in the clearing. "Have you come to destroy me? You are too late. I am part of this world now, and so are you." Black threads began to descend from the ceiling, forming a figure. It was her, the entity they had seen in the clearing. As Amy reached for the book, Zach suddenly snatched it from her. His face contorted and there was emptiness in his eyes. "Leave her alone. You don't need her anymore," he said, in a strange voice that didn't belong to him. Amy realized Zach had been captured, but she wasn't going to give up. She lunged at him, snatching the book, but the creature blocked her path. "You don't understand. This isn't a fight anymore. This is the end. Amy, shaking with fear, began to read the words of the book aloud, ignoring the shadows that tried to grab her. She knew the ritual could destroy her as well, but there was no other choice. The creature let out a piercing scream and the room began to shake. The floor beneath them split open, and bright light began to shine through the cracks. "You cannot destroy me. I am in everyone who is afraid," the entity wailed, but it was too late. Amy finished the last words, and the light filled everything around her. When Amy woke up, she was alone. The forest was gone, the church was gone, and the book had turned to ashes. She stood in an empty field, surrounded only by the wind. But deep in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end. The creature was right. It lives in the fears of every human being, and it is impossible to destroy it completely. Amy returned home, but never made contact again. The last thing she left on her blog was a short message. "Evil always comes back, but I believe someone will find a way to stop it for good. Until the fight is over."